Greetings, world. It has come to my attention that we all have been lied to. Hollywood has its false religion, its false doctrine, and its influence over this nation and the world. We must not be misled by false doctrine. I see that that the true message and testimony of Christ, how he was sent to the temple, to its people, and he spoke truth to the people. Now, Jesus' disciples came and questioned him because he spoke up in the temple, and there were some things that he spoke about the destruction that was coming in this generation. And he warned them to be on their guard and keep watch, for it will come like a thief in the night. And he warned them not to be misled by false religion, false doctrine of that generation, as we see it in our generation today, false doctrine. Many came in Christ's name then as they do today, and have influence over many people. We must not be deceived or misled. In Matthew 23, Jesus talks about and called them all hypocrites in the temple, how they weren't honoring the Father, but they were giving the honor to man other than the God. So, Jesus says that that generation will be held accountable for all the blood of the prophets, from Abel, from Zechariah, that was murdered in the temple. Now, yes, he said that generation, it's there, and it says it. He also says in Matthew 24, the disciples question him about the temple, this great temple, how he said it would be destroyed. In Matthew 23 from 24, the disciples questioned him, and they wanted answers. When would these things take place? And he warned them deeply not to be misled by false religion, by people's beliefs. And a rebellion would be already began during the time of Jesus. So we see that he spoke to them about their future, how they would bring a message to the nations among the Jews, and the Jews, some would accept and some would not. So we see that some would escape that great tribulation that was coming upon the earth then in his generation, and he warned them that they could escape such things. Now, there was 5 disciples. Only one survived, which was John, who gave the message to the book of Revelations, who wrote the book of Revelations and gave it to the assembly of the congregations, the synagogues among the Jews, preaching to Asia Minor about the great tribulation and how it would take place. And he was calling them out of Jerusalem and showing them how to worship the Father in spirit and truth when the time came for them to escape, to come out of that religion, because it was false. Now, we see in the book of Revelations, it mentions the doctrine of Jezebel and this false religion of sacrifices and different things. We also see the doctrine of Balaam mentioned in church from the time of Moses, burnt offerings and sacrifices as well in the temple. Now, we got to be careful how we worship the Father and be not misled by people's thoughts and opinions, how they shape us, how they control us. We must look to the Savior, look to the Messiah, which is Jesus Christ. And he did not come on his own behalf, but he came in the works of the Father. He came and spoke the words that God sent him. It was God's will, not his own. He came to save the people. And Jesus says in Matthew 24, when that his disciples would be betrayed and how they would be murdered by their own family and loved ones, people close to them, they would be killed. He also says it will turn to you guys as a testimony unto the Jews among the nations, as well as this nation, how they worship me. But you take no thought for what you will say and do, he said to his disciples. For it would be a testimony unto you guys, to your family, people closest to you, all those who would hear the truth. And there'll be some that don't. And they were warned, like Jesus' disciples were warned. So we see it. So I advise you to go look up read Matthew 23 and 24 carefully, and look that Jesus says that generation, just like he said in Matthew 24, that generation. Now, Jesus sounds like John the Baptist. The same words of John warning the people, how can you flee from God's wrath? O broads of vipers, I have warned you to flee. So it's the Spirit of Christ, the Spirit of the living God inside of him as it was in John. So we see that John and Jesus had the same message to the people. We see that they're the two prophets that was sent to the world to deliver the people out of bondage of Egypt, of Roman control superpower, and how it someday would come to an end, but it existed for a long time, and its influence over all humanity, and it's still around the remnant today. So we must look for Christ for answers within ourselves, not within men. Men will mislead you, because men's tongues are double. They might speak well of you, doesn't mean that they love you. They could be double-minded. So we must look to Christ for our answers, not from within ourselves, but it comes from God. God has the true message. Hollywood is full of lies, and they deceive the people. They preach false doctrine. We must be careful and be on our guard. For Christ says, as I was sent in the world, so I send you, my followers, my disciples, into the world. And not that I come to take them out of the world, but that I send them into the world, that you will keep them from evil, says the Father through Christ. So we must be on our guard at all times and keep watch. And in today's society, this false doctrine of Hollywood, we see that they're trying to recreate this spirit of the Antichrist. They're trying to recreate it. They want this spirit to rise up and have dominion and world control over the people. So there's many Antichrists, and there's many spirits of the Antichrist. Jesus said in Matthew 23 and 24, be not misled, for many will come in my name, saying, I am Christ. And they would deceive the elect. It's possible to deceive the elect. And the disciples as well, because Jesus warned his disciples, be not misled. So he warned them that the Jews in their synagogues, in their temple, would try to create a one-world religion then to mislead. And we see the church began in Jerusalem. So there we have it, that the Jews are not all bad. Some will receive Christ. Now, John, in the book of Revelations, he also writes 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, he speaks about the spirit of the Antichrist. The spirit of the Antichrist is anybody that denies Christ, denies the Father that sent him. So we see that sometimes the spirit of the Antichrist is among us. There's people among us who claim they love God and they love us. And in reality, they depart from us because it's manifest in them that they weren't of us. Just like Jesus said, they were among us, these people. John spoke and says they were among us. They were in our fellowship. They went out from us, manifest they were not of us. That means they didn't accept his teachings, his truth. So now we got to come to terms what the spirit of the Antichrist is. So, I know for a fact that things are going to go down. God does not desire sacrifice or burnt offerings. His third temple was never meant to be built. Jesus was prophesying from the prophet Jeremiah. They have made my father's house a den of thieves, and I have seen it. I bear witness to it. So Jesus overturned the tables, the money chargers, those that were selling things for burnt offerings and sacrifices. He cast them all out, all those that were selling. And this will come to an end. And then later you have Vespasian and Titus, who were under rulership as generals under Nero to make an example of this Jewish rebellion. Just like there was a rebellion in England. There was division. There was civil war throughout the whole Roman Empire. When people rebel, it causes civil war. There's division in that empire, that world empire. So we see now that when he made an example, he says, Nero says, I want to make an example of the Jews who rebel, who cause division in this empire. We must make an example of them. So he sends these two generals. And one of the generals was Vespasian, the future emperor of Rome. Now, 5 kings have fallen that came from Rome, under Caesar's bloodline. And then Nero was the last. Now, Nero was the 6th, who was then that John spoke about, that is here now. Now, he was taken out of the way. He died and committed suicide, or he was murdered. But now we see when he was murdered or commit suicide, Nero, we see that 3 kings have risen up within that year, risen up in Rome, and that their time was short. And then all of a sudden there was civil war in Rome, just like there was civil war in England, Rome, Spain, all over the place in this Roman Empire. So now Vespasian sieges the great city, and they go throughout Judea, and they put a siege around it, and they destroy the nations over there. Now, when Vespasian found out that the emperor committed suicide, the siege stopped. But the siege lasted for 3 years and a half under Vespasian and Titus. Now, Titus was the son of Vespasian. Now, when Vespasian found out that the emperor committed suicide and the 3 kings were fighting, he let them fight among each other. So Vespasian controlled legions of armies and controlled Egypt, the Roman Egypt, and Judea, and Israel, and Jerusalem, the great city of the earth. Now, we see that Vespasian went back to Egypt and wanted to know, why did Nero commit suicide? So as they fought each other, you have 5 kings. One which is the 6th, which was Nero. And then we see that Vespasian is the 7th, true Roman emperor. But the 5 were fighting within that year. There was 4 kings. The 3 of them were uprooted. They were done away with. They couldn't handle the pressure. So then Vespasian, which he already sieged Israel and Egypt, now he went back to Rome to take it and take his throne. And then he told his son Titus to stay in Jerusalem, because there comes a day where Titus would destroy Israel under orders of his father, to wipe out the Jews, to trap the Jews within their temple, within their city, where they could not get out. And that's in Luke 19, Luke 21, Matthew 24. It happened in Jesus' generation. And we know how many generations is in the Jewish calendar. So now we see that the 2 beasts of Revelations was Titus and Vespasian. And Jesus says there will be great tribulation that will come upon the earth. Why upon the earth? Because the Jews go up year by year, day by day, month by month, in their Sabbaths to worship God in the temple and to do their burnt offerings and sacrifices. God never commanded burnt offerings and sacrifices. God sent his son, and Jesus said, I do not desire burnt offerings and sacrifices. So he's telling the Jews not to worship God in that way, because they were mixing false religion, their old ways, with which they transgress against God's law in the land. And as it was then, there was a powerful influence over the Roman-controlled Jews. And they tried to break free of that Roman control, and we see that they were destroyed. Doesn't that sound like America today? That if you don't accept its currency or its democracy, you're destroyed by the petrodollar. So there we go. The remnant of the Roman Empire is a part of America because America is a part of the old British Empire, which has its kings from Wales. We know who Wales are, Queen Elizabeth, descendants. And we know that Vespasian played a part under one of the emperors, fighting and conquering England, Britain. Yes, it's a part of remnant of the old Roman Empire. People, when they lose control, they try to hold it up to rebuild better. So we must look to the Lord for answers, not man. Man will mislead you. Remember that. God loves you as I love you. We might have our differences, but I still show God's love. And sometimes we got to let go of what we think we know, because what we think we know could be lies. I mean, if you look at it, the Mandela effect is all, we're living in a world full of illusions. What we think we know, we do not know anything at all. That's why our wisdom, our knowledge is nothing. God says, let go of the wisdom and knowledge that you know. I will put to shame the wise, the prudent. I'll put to shame those who think they're wise and those who think they're rich in the earth. I will put them to shame. Their riches, their wealth, their understanding, their knowledge will not save them. And that's in the prophet Jeremiah. He spoke many words to the Jews and said a double portion of God's wrath will come upon them. A double portion of destruction. Look at Titus and Vespasian. They didn't bring God's judgment, but Nero told them to make an example. They sieged the great city. They didn't destroy it just yet. And Vespasian came there, but then he later gives orders to his son to destroy it and trap everybody inside of the great city. So we see, John says, what city is like this great city? Well, let me see here. We got Rome, who has 7 hills. We got Jerusalem, that has 7 hills. So we see that Rome and Israel is an example of those 2 great cities. So we have to be careful. Now, there's been so much false doctrine. We have to let go of what we think we know, because we really don't know anything at all. But pray for them. Their minds are blinded by the god of this world, Satan. Once took Jesus up to the pinnacle of the temple and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and says, all these things, including this temple, including the men who worship in this temple, I will give you all these things if you worship me as God. And Jesus looked at him and said, you are not my God, and I will not give my power, my glory to you and give it up. For I know you well, Satan, you have no power over me. So Satan departed from him, but tempting him many ways to try to make him fall from the first estate. But it did not happen. Christ was stronger because God was with him. God was within him. And he spoke up against the evil that was in the world. So we have it. Love your neighbor. Pray for people that their eyes may be open to the truth. So we must constantly be watchful. We are the ones that we are the remnant that have come out of the great tribulation. We are the great multitude that can't be numbered. The Gentiles will flow to the people of Israel. They will come out of Egypt and out of Roman Egypt, among the nations of the world. God said he would make a new covenant with them, not as when they came out of Egypt, but they will come out of the world, wherever they were scattered. So we see we have 2 remnants, 2 olive trees, standing before the God of the earth. And its prophets already came. Jesus says in the transformation of Christ, When he was transfigured, Moses and Elijah appeared in a vision to Christ. They were speaking to God what would be accomplished in Jerusalem. So we see the works of Christ being accomplished. We see Christ as the prophet like Moses in that generation. And Jesus, when he came down from the mountaintop, disciples asked him, why does the Pharisees of our day in our generation say that Elijah must first come? And Jesus said, I tell you, Elijah has come already and they knew him not. And he was killed and persecuted. So Elijah was John the Baptist. And Jesus was the Son of Man who would come. So we see in the transformation of Christ at the end where they questioned Jesus about Elijah coming. They realized that he was speaking of John. John came in the power and spirit of Elijah. And he was preaching to the Jews, O brothers of generations of vipers who have warned you to flee from the wrath of God. You can escape these things. Just obey me. Obey the Father. Turn back to his statutes and judgments of the land. But they continue to break God's covenant and follow after other gods and other traditions of men which was passed down to them throughout the generations. You look at Jezebel. Jezebel was her identity. She was the queen of Israel. Now the king of Israel was corrupted by false religion and by false beliefs. And sacrifice and burnt offerings of her ways were mixed with the children of Israel. And then we have Balaam. Balaam was a prophet who was misled by his own greed. He was corrupted by the kings during the times of Moses. And he corrupted the children of Israel by burnt offerings, sacrifices, fornication. It means turning away from the Father to worship other gods and to do burnt offerings and sacrifices and other offerings. And they mixed their old ways and brought them into the temple of God, God's house. God was not pleased. God sent the prophets and told them, when you came out of Egypt, I did not command any of the Jews for burnt offerings and sacrifices. Jeremiah chapter 7. So we see that the people have been misled by false doctrine of the generations of their fathers, being misled unto this day. They want to rebuild the temple. They want to do burnt offerings and sacrifices. But God does not desire sacrifice. There's a God of this world who causes confusion, as he caused confusion in Moses' day. This angel went before Moses. And we really don't know who the angel was, but they worshiped the heavenly hosts and worshiped false gods and did burnt offerings to those gods. Even Stephen says that they worship God in vain in their burnt offerings and sacrifices. So does the prophets like Jeremiah, Ezekiel, they all say it. It's nice talking to you guys and sharing this testimony of truth. The same testimony that was given to the 5 disciples who were in Israel who spoke to Christ. And it would turn to them to a testimony to us, that we may learn these truths and not be misled by men. So we have it there that they brought this testimony of truth to the Gentile Jews in the synagogues, nation to nation. Look at Asia. Asia was an example. The Jews were among Asia during the captives. They were taken captive to every nation. Now they'll be brought back to their nation. Have a good day, guys. Love you.